In Colombia, the nationwide demonstrations against the neoliberal policies of President Iván Duque continue, as well as the violent repression by law enforcement forces. Argentina registered on absolute records on contagions and fatalities since the pandemic began in March 2020. Palestine continues under siege by Israeli airstrikes and attacks. Hello, welcome to From the South. I am Janet Perez Moya from the TeleSUR studios in La Habana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Stay with us. In Colombia, the nationwide demonstrations against the government of Iván Duque continue, as well as violent repressions by law enforcement forces. According to local media on Tuesday morning, the demonstrations passed without incidents in the main cities of the country. In the afternoon, some road blockades were reported in Bogotá, Medellín, and Ibagué. Also, temporary workers in the education sectors staged pacific protests in Bogotá. Also in Cundinamarca, several demonstrations were reported in the station portal of Las Americas, and it was announced indigenous communities mobilizations known as Minga joined the protests in Medellín. Since the beginning of the protests in Colombia on April 28, 2,837 cases of police violence have been reported in the country. According to NGO Temblores, the monitor the police brutality case in the country, between April 28 and May 17, 384 Colombians has been victims of direct law enforcement violence during the demonstrations and 146 gunshot wounded. Also, the organization reports 43 murders perpetrated by public force and 1,139 arbitrary detentions. 33 protesters has eye injuries due to the frequent police shootings of demonstration phases. The Temblores also report 18 women have been sexually assaulted and 5 people suffer gender-based violence. In Colombia, more sectors joined the national strike that began on April 28, among them the truck drivers. One of the issues that require negotiations is the cost of fuel. Colombia is one of the countries with the highest costs per gallon of fuel and diesel, and it's the most consumed fuel by this union. The issue directly affects the profits. On the other hand, there are the tolls that accumulated more profits than concessionaries and the government, who obtain money from the roads use. In Colombia, it is normal to find highway tolls in distance of less than 30 kilometers, with an average cost up to $24 for the category of so-called tractor trucks. An example of this is the Bogotá's Buenaventura trip, with the cost of $350. Since April 28, the country has been the sense of a national strike where different sectors have united in one voice to protest against the neoliberal model of the government of Iván Duque.
It is a complicated issue right now because the people are asking in a certain way that the government help us cope with the economy. We are in a bad situation, many tolls, very expensive fuel, very cheap shipping. We are doing what we can to have survived, and the government does not want to have a dialogue.
The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, during a working meeting of the Bicentennial 2021 University Admission System, denounced the repression of the government of Iván Duque against the protests against the national strike in Colombia that has left, according to unofficial figures, at least 45 murdered youths and more than 600 disappeared.
La juventud colombiana tiene 3 semanas en las calles.
Colombian youth have been on the streets for 3 weeks, being massacred. In Colombia, more than 45 young people have been murdered, more than 600 missing people who do not know where they are. A massacre against the youth of Colombia, a massacre against all the people of Colombia just for wanting that youth a right to study, to education, to universities. In Colombia, all the right to study is privatized. There is no right to study. There is no right to education. Many Colombian families are making the decision to send their children to university age to study the university career in Venezuela because they know that it is free and of great quality.
In this context, the Venezuelan head of state criticized the operational deployment throughout Colombia, ordered by President Iván Duque, under the silence of the international community.
Fíjense ayer, mientras el Comité Nacional del Paro...
Yesterday, while the Colombian National Strike Committee was meeting with good intentions with the Colombian government to negotiate, Iván Duque ordered the militarization of all cities in the country and the shooting of youth, indigenous people, workers, and women. The cases of sexual abuse against young people that led to the suicide of a girl in Popoyan, how painful, heartbreaking. It's news you can't even hear. It's heartbreaking. And what the international community does, asks Venezuela. What the world human rights system does in the face of the massacre of Iván Duque against the people of Colombia, what is done? Much euphemism, much silence, much complicity.
On Tuesday, Peru's Public Prosecutor's Office defended the accusation filed against former President Alberto Fujimori and former Health Minister to investigate forced sterilizations from 1995 to 2000 and denied that the case is time-barred as the former president's defense claims. The prosecutors in charge of the forced sterilizations case, Pablo Espinosa, reiterated that the Peruvian justice system must continue with the investigation and also reject another argument of the former president's defense, according to which Fujimori would not be responsible as the perpetrators by means of the sterilizations, while emphasizing that the rights to truth and justice must prevail. Along with Fujimori, former ministers Eduardo John, Marino Costa Bauer, and Alejandro Aguinaga are accused of serious injury followed by death against 5 women and serious injury against 1,300 people. The 4 former officials are accused of forcing almost 350,000 women and 25,000 men to undergo sterilizations, processed dough, an alleged government plan to reduce the birth rate in rural regions and indigenous communities in the country. More news coming up after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Argentina registered on Tuesday over 35,000 new cases of COVID-19 and 745 deaths, an absolute record since the pandemic began in March 2020, at the time when the government is evaluating the reinforcement of restrictions to avoid the collapse of the health system. President Alberto Fernández announced that his government will accelerate the vaccination plan, which so far has covered 17.9% of the population, but also asked the public to follow the social distancing measures to avoid contagion. Occupancy of intensive care units reached 72%.
Today we have sad news, frankly because of the number of contagions, that should call us to reflection and, once and for all, understand that there are many siren songs that speak of the need to be free and that freedom they invoke leads us to contagions and death. I ask you not to lower your guard. Vaccines are arriving. We are going to accelerate the vaccination process, but we also need our conscience.
And Argentinian people react to the new record of COVID-19 contagions and fatalities in the country.
People don't look after themselves. None of us take care of ourselves, and we want to go out and travel. I traveled the first days of mobility restrictions, and now you travel as you wish. It is impossible to control people. People have no control. They have no notion of the amount of people dying.
It scares me, I'm telling you the truth. It scares me because tomorrow something could happen to me or it could happen to other people. So what I want is for the contagion to go down, because if it doesn't, it seems to me that we are all going backwards.
In Brazil, former Foreign Minister Ernesto Araujo denied interference by the United States government in negotiations with Russia for the acquisition of the Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine. Ernesto Araujo made the statement during his appearance before the Senate Commission investigating the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic by President Jair Bolsonaro. When questioned about the subject, the former Brazilian minister indicated that he has no knowledge of any interference by Washington in this sense. Araujo made the statement despite the fact that U.S. government report during Donald Trump's administrations states that the White House pursued the Brazilian executive not to buy Sputnik V. The Jair Bolsonaro decision to ignore the pandemic led to health crisis affecting more than 20 Brazilian regions. On Wednesday, Moroccan police closed the Tarajal border crossing in the autonomous city of Ceuta and interrupted the massive inflows of asylum seekers to Spain. Morocco closed the border after more than 8,000 undocumented people arrived in Spain since the early hours of Monday morning, half of whom have already been returned to their countries. The flow of entries through Tarajal Beach was interrupted, although there are still people in the other side of the border trying to reach Ceuta. In parallel, many of the migrants who arrived in the last hours are still returning to Morocco, and at least 4,800 of them have already returned to their country, as confirmed by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. On Tuesday, in Italy, migrants farm workers gathered outside Parliament to demand the government better working conditions. Hundreds of migrant workers in Italy protest in front of the Parliament with the purpose of demanding the authorities to be visible in the country and not to have working conditions because they live and work in the country without any legal status. With banners and slogans, the demonstrators, who are mostly agricultural workers, asked the government to consider residence permits, social security, and a decent wage to facilitate their work in the country. In India, the damage caused by Cyclone Tauktae are quite extensive. So far, 33 people have died and 89 are missing. The Department of Meteorology says that the Cyclone Tauktae weakened to a depression and it's stationed in southern Rajasthan, 60 kilometers southwest of Udaipur town. One forecasts light to moderate rains for the next few hours. Power outages were reported from a large number of villages, including hospital assistance, COVID-19 patients, and oxygen plants. Battling extreme weather, the Indian Navy and Coast Guards have rescued so far 314 people on board of two barges that went adrift in the Arabian Sea near Mumbai, hours before Cyclone Tauktae hit the Gujarat coast.
In recent years, I have never seen such a devastating cyclone in Mumbai. Before, there was a similar devastating cyclone in 1965, and for the first time since then, I have seen such a cyclone. People have suffered a lot of damage, and they will have to struggle hard to come out of it.
Meanwhile, the crew members of a sunken offshore ship was rescued by the Indian Navy and Coast Guards. The defense minister said that Navy ships had already rescued nearly 600 people after waves up to 8 meters height hit offshore oil installations. Coast Guard rescuers have retrieved 22 bodies from the sea, as planes and helicopters were also looking for 65 workers missing from one of several support vessels that slipped in the mornings in the storm and sank. As a result of the cyclone's path through the Asian country, many houses were damaged, trees were uprooted, and engineers were working to restore power to hundreds of thousands of people affected by the storm.
The Indian Navy was a godsend for us. They arrived in the nick of time. We were clinging on the barge, and luckily the life jackets helped us as the water was going over our head. The Navy officials threw ropes and life buoys. We are lucky to be alive. The Navy gave us warm food and medical treatment. We jumped from the barge as we saw the situation. Gradually, the water started surging over our heads and we kept bobbing up and down. Don't know how long we were there.
More news in a minute. Join us after this. being killed in their homes. The United Nations Security Council held a meeting on Tuesday but failed to take an action to stop the violence. In this regard, the United States has blocked the UN's most powerful body, which is charged with maintaining international peace and security, from using a press statement calling for a halt to the violence. Meanwhile, countries like France had proposed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in coordination with Egypt and Jordan. The proposal not only seeks to cease hostilities but also allow humanitarian access to those in need. As part of the international community support, France present a draft resolution to members of the United Nations Security Council calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. French President Emmanuel Macron's office publicly announced their position on this following a meeting with his Egyptian counterpart, who is currently visiting Paris, and Jordan's King Abdullah II, who joined it via video conference. In addition to demanding an immediate end to the violence, the core of the resolution text stressed the urgent need for humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The French move to surprise the United States, which has 3 times in the past week blocked a joint statement with similar messaging, insisting that such measures will not help advance a ceasefire. In Chile, the Palestinian community protests in Santiago against Israeli airstrikes on Gaza Strip, as well as the military occupation and ethnic cleansing policies. More than 1,000 people met the Club Palestino football headquarters in eastern Santiago to demonstrate against Israel's relentless bombing campaign. The Palestinian community in Chile is the largest outside the Middle East, with more than 300,000 people. They joined the demonstrations that have taken place around the world in support of the hundreds of Palestinian civilians victims who have already died in these attacks. Chile recognized Palestine as a state in 2011, supporting its entrance to UNESCO.
So that's why we are here today, because we have to stand up. We are tired of the silence, tired of the Israeli occupation, of an illegitimate state. So that's why we stand up. Palestinian brothers, Gaza resists, Palestine exists.
What is happening there is so terrible that I have to move and get all the people screaming to stop what is happening. We deserve to live, and we are human beings. We are not animals, and we are not people who want war. What we are looking for is only peace. Peace for the girls and boys who are dying every day.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators rallied in the cities across the United States on Tuesday, calling for an end to the worst Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip in years. Demonstrators took to the streets in Midtown Manhattan in New York, gathering near the Consulate General of Israel. Meanwhile, others took to the streets in cities such as Boston and Michigan, waving Palestinian flags and holding placards that read "End Israeli Apartheid" and "Freedom for Gaza." Protesters also denounced the war crimes committed by the Israeli regime in Gaza.
Because I'm Palestinian and I have family in Palestine, and I have to do whatever it takes. My existence itself is resistance, and I need to fight for my family to be safe. Everyone has the right to be on their homes without being ethnically cleansed or be threatened to be completely erased, and that's what Palestinians are going through.
Also in the United States, hundreds demonstrated in support of Palestine outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, demanding an end to Israeli airstrike in the Gaza Strip. President Biden and his administration have come under pressure to condemn Israel's escalations of attacks on Palestinians. However, the Biden administration has continued to voice support for its allies and Israel's supposed right to defend itself. In South Africa, the West Coast Black business community in Saldanha Bay, the Western Cape province of the country, came together to create a professional body to better respond to opportunities presented by the harbor's industrial development zone. Our collaborator, Stephen Taylor, has the details.
The West Coast Black business community in Saldanha Bay organized themselves to form a professional body called Black Business Alliance in order to respond with capacity to opportunities presented by the establishment of the Industrial Development Zone at the Saldanha Bay Harbor. What is exciting are the reflections of these business people who thrived against the narrative that sought to indicate inexperience, low quality, and other negatives. Here to tell us more about the IDZ is Kashifa Bukas, CEO of the Saldanha Bay IDZ.
The world is changing. Global markets are shifting. And with the onslaught of the pandemic, new ideas and new ways of doing traditional engineering and services must be found. Through the Innovation Campus, space is being created to bring these new ideas to market and respond to these shifting local and global market trends affecting business and society.
Here to tell us more is Sammy Claassen, spokesperson and one of the founding members of the Black Business Alliance.
Started on the 18th of July 2018 in Saldanha Bay. We started it, and it was started because there was a need for an organized forum that can organize local black businesses for Saldanha Bay, and that was precisely to put in place an infrastructure program and a zone that will provide services to the oil and gas sector.
Representing the business community of the Saldanha Bay region is Tennyson Andrews from Tuere Contractors and Enrico Adams of Jocwa Marine.
We're mainly working in the insurance industry in the areas of Cape Town, West Coast, in the Boland regions, where we're doing maintenance work for insurance companies like Absa Insurance, Nedbank Insurance, Hollard, Old Mutual, Brights, and others. We've also ventured recently into the commercial space, where we do commercial sites for GVK Siazama, especially in the Saldanha Bay area.
Our job is the subsea work, where we are removing rails and installing them by doing core drilling and installing them again, and putting anodes, rubbing blocks, winch block and end stoppers in the Saldanha Bay slip.
For TeleSUR News in Cape Town, I'm Stephen Taylor.
We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For TeleSUR English, I am Janet Perez Moya. Thank you for watching.